I'm Amanda Whitfort. I'm an Associate Professor in the Department of Professional Legal Education at the Law Faculty, University of Hong Kong. My research is primarily into animal welfare legislation in Hong Kong and Asia with a view to improving matters for animals. In recent years, there's been unprecedented public concern about animal cruelty in Hong Kong. There's also been concern about the stray dog population. Government has had a policy to catch and kill, and there are 7,000 animals euthanized every year. The 2010 review of animal welfare legislation, which I conducted with Dr. Woodhouse at the SPCA, was the first review of its kind to consider animal welfare legislation, and we determined whether the legislation was doing what it's intended to do and how it could be improved to the benefit of those animals.
The key area for the SPCA is to improve the fundamental legislation that protects animals and actually will give a prescriptive, proactive framework in line with current understanding of animal welfare and also current legislative development globally.
What we have sought to do is to provide government and the public with the information that they need in order to adopt policies and legislation that will protect these animals. As a criminal lawyer, I've long been interested in the protection of the vulnerable within society, women, children and animals. And my research has started to focus in on animals as a particular area of concern.
I think Professor Whitford's research on animal welfare legislation is extremely important. It puts forward the case very strongly for reform of Hong Kong's legislation, and it also does something else. It informs and encourages debate within government and the wider community.
We can see that animal welfare legislation was very outdated, so there's a need to bring it up to date, but also to make sure that that update is based on the latest research and good research, not just simply concerns in the community.
The difference between our legislation and the legislation that we see overseas is that overseas there has been an introduction of a new standard for the care of animals, and that is a duty of care, which is placed on anybody who has an animal to provide it with a reasonable standard of living.
Animal abuse in Hong Kong is probably about on the same par with much of the developed world in terms that we do have malicious abuse and deliberate acts of cruelty, but these are a small percentage overall, and on the whole, most of the animal cruelty is related to neglect.
The legislation in Hong Kong is old and it is piecemeal. It's difficult to find, it's difficult to understand, and it's therefore difficult to enforce. The main problem is that our primary legislation, the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Ordinance, has been in place since 1935, and it has not been significantly amended since that date.
It's extremely difficult to have the law legislation changed. Virtually any government is conservative and resistant to change, but the process of change is hugely helped if you have supporting your arguments the kind of empirical comparative research that Professor Whitford has produced.
The great thing about the law review is it's helped us immensely because it compares other jurisdictions such as Australia and America, and has helped us in our quest to try and improve things in Hong Kong to bring them up to international standards.
Our review identified ways to overcome those legislative impediments to trap, neuter, return, and as a result policy has changed and government is looking for sites in order to introduce trial trap, neuter, return programs along with rabies vaccination to control dog population.
You got a Kong in there, you're a bit lucky, aren't you? You got toys, you're a bit lucky. Yeah.
Most animals in Hong Kong are being sourced from unlicensed breeders. That means that they are coming from effectively puppy mill, kitten mill situations. In those situations, the welfare of the animals is not being controlled, and we therefore have problems with sick animals, under-socialised animals, animals that are not treated in accordance with normal standards of care. Our review has received extremely widespread support by political parties within Hong Kong. 6 of the major parties called on government in November 2010 to introduce an animal welfare friendly policy reflecting the findings of our review. Both the former and current Secretary for Food and Health committed themselves to studying our findings further, and our review has been extensively referred to within the environmental hygiene panel meetings in relation to legislative reform for the better protection of animals in pet shops and in food markets.
With regards to breeding, this will mean that all breeding for commercial purposes will be licensed. That means that we'll be able to inspect and regulate properly. That means that we'll be able to trace back to the point of origin problems with dogs that are sold.
Our research into animal welfare legislation in Hong Kong is the first of its kind and is still the only document that provides this information to policymakers, to governments and to the public.
Knowledge exchange in this case is a very good way of showing the impact of this particular piece of research, particularly because it's the primary cause that we can see for this policy change, and also there was direct credit given by both the government and by the NGOs.
As part of the knowledge exchange through this review, I have been invited to give training to both the police and to the Department of Justice in order to prove their management of animal welfare cases, and this has been a successful result of the review.